Hello. Good morning. I guess it's morning where everybody is. Is it still morning? How's everybody doing? Tara, you look really cozy.
I woke up not that long ago.
Sounds good. How's everybody? Tired?
Yeah, excited for school. We're almost done, so.
How are your other classes? You have a lot of work to do still?
Yeah.
Exams? Well, it's good to see you. We're gonna just do our workshopping and I'll let you go so you can get to all the other things that you have to do. Thanks for your author event reports. And on Friday, what's due is your writing reflection, a reflection of how your writing or you may have changed since you wrote your second week writing biography. And I think, let's see. That one is, $750 words. And I think that's about 3 pages. So it's not as long as your fiction or personal essay for the portfolio. It's a little shorter. Hopefully that helps. So what's going on? Anybody have any news? No? Well, why don't we start with my missing piece. And why don't you read, let's see. I know this is, it's kind of in the middle of a paragraph. I walked to the fridge to run out the door. I think you're still muted. Oh, I can unmute you. There you go.
Okay, so from fridge to what?
From fridge to out the door.
Okay. Let's see, where is fridge?
The last sentence on the first page on my printout.
Okay. I don't see.
After temperature warms up.
Okay, I walk to the fridge when my wrist begins to buzz. I look down at my watch and it's my mom. My heart drops and I mumble under my breath, please say he didn't die, please say he didn't die. I close the fridge door and step away to answer my phone. Tyra, my mom says as I pick up the phone, my hands are shaking. Mom, please tell me he isn't gone already. Please, I'm begging you. He isn't gone yet, but he's close. You should come. I know you're babysitting, but he isn't going to make it past today, my mom replies. I'll try and get something figured out. I'll call you in a minute. I set my phone down, wiping the tear that escapes from my eyes. I look up to see Hannah sitting on the couch, watching TV, so peaceful and innocent. I proceed to call her mom and tell her that I need to leave and that I'm so terribly sorry to have to do this to her. She reassures me that it's okay and tells me that Hannah's grandma will be over soon. When her grandma arrives, I grab my bag with my clothes and begin to run out the door.
Thank you. And I think that I can speak for everybody when I say we're really sorry for your loss. So with that, who wants to start?
I
I
can
can
start.
start.
Um,
Oh, you go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Well, like Elaine said, like I'm really sorry about your dad, but I think your essay did like a really good job of like capturing all these like really important moments and like memories you have with your dad. And like I think it was all worded really nicely. So I like appreciated sorry, I'm like trying to read my workshop letter on the side too. Oh yeah, and then I just said I appreciated how you started it like from that morning and kind of like built on like everything that was happening that like built up to um it. And yeah, I don't know, I think you did a really good job.
To kind of go off of Lily, I also agree that like I think the first part of like the opening is what really like sets the tone of the piece, and I think it's like the best spot to open up because it just kind of shows how like you're not always in an ideal situation when things like this happen, and it's just very like real and raw, and all the emotions come through very strongly. But yeah, like obviously the second half of the piece is very strong and emotional, but I think like the first part definitely deserves recognition too.
Yeah, I agree. As you know, Tyra, this piece made me cry just because I feel like not only how you wrote it, like I felt like the way you wrote it, we were there with you. Like every step of the way, like I could understand like how you felt and like the panic and the rush that you were in. And I felt like to be able to do that about this topic is very important and like it's very touching to us, especially because it's such a difficult topic to write about. Yeah.
I agree with that. I really liked how much your voice came across during it, and your writing of emotions was very strong and this is a very difficult topic to write about, and you did an amazing job displaying and showing your emotions.
I really liked how the emotion was described in this piece, and like it was a very raw piece, and it was done very well. And I think the descriptions in this piece were really good, and they were simple, but they did the job, and they were very effective. And I thought that like overall, the descriptions were very even. They were sprinkled throughout the piece rather than having an info dump or a setting dump, which is something that I really appreciated because that gets hard to follow sometimes. And like Lauren said, it was like we're right there with you. And as you were writing about as I was reading about the part where you're speeding to the hospital or wherever you're going, you're speeding there, I felt like I was there with you, and I was like, oh my god, my heart's starting to beat. I need to like stop and like remember that I'm not in this situation. It was very real, so I really appreciated it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah. Oh, hi. I went off of what Tim said with the like speeding part. It was just really good imagery, and I feel like it really helped solidify because you said you were in a panic. You were like, I was rolling like 90, and it was really great imagery, as well as I like that you used dialogue to establish context and not just like out and said it, you know? It was wonderful. I'm sorry for your loss. I also cried during it. It was great.
I liked all the dialogue that you were able to incorporate in it. I thought that was like everyone else has been saying, that it kind of felt like we were there with you. I thought that is kind of the aspect of the piece that made me feel that way. So I enjoyed the dialogue.
I agree with what everyone else has been saying and trying to think of something constructive. What I wrote that was different in my letter is I felt like after reading it, I knew you a little bit better and I could understand you a little bit better. And I noted in my letter that if a reader is left with that feeling, that's how you know it's a good personal narrative, because it really resided with me and I could see that this was a personal story.
I really liked that you displayed like your final words almost like word for word, like you'll never forget it kind of. I thought that was super powerful. And I also really liked that you didn't even have to tell the reader your father's condition and it would still have just as much impact on the reader. But I do like that you kind of waited until the middle / the end to tell us that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of said what everyone else has been saying, but like I loved the emotion behind your writing because I think it made your piece so powerful. And I also loved that like while reading it, I kind of like didn't know exactly what was going to happen until the end, and that you kind of kept everyone like on their toes when you were reading it, with like the suspense behind it, which I thought you did a really good job with that too.
Kind of going off of what everyone else has said too, but like I liked how you didn't only include your emotions, but as well as like your family, and especially like in the middle towards the end, it was like your brother's emotion. So I like how you did a good job portraying that. But yeah, otherwise it did take me a while to get through this, and I was at work when I was reading it and I was crying.
Scara?
Sorry, there was a train and a bunch of trucks and a bunch of geese. What I like about it is the way it kind of, it builds up to, it's all emotion, and it kind of builds up to, at certain points, there's like emotional crescendos, like really like where it drops the bomb, kind of, and like when you know, I won't say, you know, I'm sure this is really hard for you to relive over and over again by writing it, but I think it's well constructed the way it kind of has peaks, and then it sort of has moments where you're describing a lot, and then it sort of builds up to another crescendo, kind of like, I don't know, I always compare literature to songs, but this reminds me of kind of like, I don't know, Nirvana Smells Like Teen Spirit, where it kind of just builds up into a crescendo, and then it sort of lets go for a little bit, and then it builds up again. So I like that.
Yeah, I really like those waves of emotion too, you know, from the beginning where you describe what might end up being sort of a normal day, and then, you know, you get the phone call and you're racing out the door and you're racing down the road. And then, you know, it's still emotional, but you're, you know, giving us more information about your dad and your siblings and stuff. And then, so yeah, I do like those waves of emotion, and the rhythm of the piece and the pacing of your piece. Did we miss anybody with things they liked? So what about questions or things that you might want clarification on, or just things that might need a little bit of work?
I thought of something that wasn't necessarily a critique, because there was nothing that came across as unclear that I wanted necessarily like more detail on. More of a suggestion. I thought that the strongest piece of your essay was when you had the paragraph when it was kind of like your final speech to your father. And I almost thought that if you maybe braided that throughout your essay and chose the braided essay narrative, that would add a lot more strength to your piece, I think, because I think that'd be really interesting, like if you just added it in at little points and then kind of at the very end it's like your whole speech has been written out. I think that could take your already really strong emotional piece to the next narrative level.
Just a small thing from me. I would have liked to see more of your internal thoughts, like during your car ride. You described it as being like a longer car ride, a longer drive to get to the hospice care place, but it's a short section. I think extending that section could be like get across the thought, like the emotions of how long and hard this drive was.
Something that I would like to know, just really small nitpicky detail, but you like say the name of like you say Hannah's name and stuff like that, and you only mention her for a little bit, which is fine, and I think you should keep that. But you talk about your siblings more, and you don't really say their names. So I was just like, maybe you could add the names of your siblings to make it easier to follow along, because I feel like your siblings are important characters.
Something that I thought that isn't like a critique or anything because everything made sense, but I thought maybe like adding some of like after being at the hospice care place could be effective just because like as someone that hasn't been through that, I have no idea like what do you do with the rest of your day? How do you like process things? I think it's fine how it is now, but I think that that could just kind of help like the audience understand what it's like.
Yeah, going off of that, I wrote that I would love to hear about your life kind of now, being not even a year later, but just later on, which I know would be hard because it's so specific from the morning to the end of the day, just that one day. But like and I know there was a page limit as well, but just kind of going further with it, I think that would be good.
Yeah, the only thing I put, kind of related to what Tim said, was I said to maybe put not necessarily your siblings' names because I feel like that might kind of get messy, but like at least their ages. Because you said like your little sister ran out, and I was trying to imagine like, is she like little? Is she like a few years younger kind of thing?
Yeah, I really did not know what to critique about this. I didn't find it confusing or anything. So I just said there's like a few places that I feel like the flow could have worked just a little better. Like I know you had great wording. I obviously said that earlier that I felt like I was right there with you. But I just feel like within each sentence itself, if you read it out loud, you can kind of like tweak one word or like change the order, like something like it's really nitpicky and little, but I didn't know what else to say.
One thing that I thought was there were just minor punctuation errors and some spacing that was a little off, but also I think Tim said this was adding your siblings' names because that is like a really big part. And maybe in the closing, you could wrap it up with kind of how your family has moved along and just, yeah, I guess moved along, kind of remembers your dad and things like that. But otherwise, I had nothing else.
Yeah, going off what Caitlin and Lauren just said, I had like a pretty hard time like finding anything really to critique, but the one thing I said was just like making sure all your sentences flow like naturally and making sure like all the grammar matches and punctuation's right, because there's like little minor things, but nothing big.
Yeah, I agree with that. Just making sure that some of the sentences flow better. With such a personal piece like this, I mean, obviously, it's going to be how you want it to be. So it's not something that I could find a critique on. But yeah, I agree with them.
At first, I was going to say, like everybody or a lot of people said, maybe a little more detail. But I think this is a personal account of your emotional journey, and to add more detail, in my opinion, might distract from it or detract from it. But because I was thinking maybe you could add description of the commotion at the hospital, because there's always a bunch of noises and beeps and stuff, and but I don't think that's necessary, because this is really just an emotional journey, and it's just sort of a diary entry of what you're, if you had like an emotional diary or something, but there's one little thing I noticed. I haven't heard dad breath. Is that supposed to be breathe? It's the only thing I noticed. Sorry.
Did you?
Yeah, I only could find was when I was reading it, like you put so much detail, like from the beginning of your day all the way up to like when you like saw your dad, that like I feel like I wanted just a little more detail, like when you actually like got to see him and like talk to him, and like the moments like leading up to all that. Like I think you did a great job like describing the babysitting scene and like all of that, and then like I just wanted like maybe just a few more details, like I felt like towards the end maybe, but other than that, like I thought it was.
So did we miss anybody? I don't think so. So part of the reason why I had you read from the phone call was that I thought that really was gripping from the beginning, even though, like I said, I like the ebb and flow of the emotions. And I just wondered if you would think about maybe condensing the part with Hannah at her house. So we get the picture that this is, what your typical summer day might be, or what you were looking forward to, and then, bam. And also, I think the emotion of this piece is really, really immediate. And some of it is written in present tense, and some of it is written in past. And I would go through it, and I would recommend it in first person. Not first person, present tense, because that really makes it helps with the immediacy that you already have there. So I would go through it and put it in present tense. Anybody else have any comments? Do you have any questions for us?
No, thank you. I know this was kind of a little bit of a intense piece. I didn't really know what everyone was going to think of it. It was kind of scary for me to turn in, but your guys' words mean a lot, so thank you.
Well, thank you for your courage in writing it and sharing it. Really, really powerful. So, how about Megan? Let's see. Why don't you read the first 3 stanzas?
Okay. You left us sad and confused. You didn't deserve this. Now what do I do? Every day I miss you, but I just have to get through. You were Papa's rock, his life and his muse. You were Dad's safe ground and my best friend. So many things remind me of you. A bright day, an early morning, the choir's at church. But somehow I just have to get through. The lake house will never be the same. You brought the warmth, smiles, and delicious baked goods. No one will ever replace you. I will forever miss your kind demeanor, but I just have to get through.
Thank you. And again, condolences for your loss. Who wants to go first?
I can go first. I said I loved this poem a lot. I was really surprised when I opened it that someone else had done something like this. I said that the beats per stanza is very consistent, which I thought was super nice. So that like when you read it, it's not choppy at all. I said that your poem is simple and full of like memories, and I thought that was super personal and sweet.
Yeah, I agree with everything Tara said. I also said in my letter that I really liked how personal it was. I know that writing about a topic like this can be very difficult. I also said that I liked how you repeated the phrase, I just had to get through. Because in those times, in those positions, like literally all you are thinking is like, I just have to get through this. Like, so I felt like that was like relatable and just like sticks with you. And I could just be reading into it too much, and I don't even know if you meant to do this, but I liked how the text was centered, because I thought of it as like you and your Nana like coming together, because like she'll always be with you. Side note, I also call one of my grandparents Nana, so that also like touched me in another way. But yeah, it was good. I liked it.
I really liked your use of line breaks to add like emphasis to the lines. My favorite is the first two lines. You left us sad and confused. Putting the line you left us alone, but it also being a continuation, it gives that line like two meanings in one. It's like two lines, but only one. And I don't know. I really like that, and just you use there's a very powerful use of line breaks.
I said that I liked how you organized your poem so it ended each stanza with kind of the same line. I thought that really tied the piece together.
Yeah, I put that, so my favorite lines were, "You were Papa's rock, his life and his muse," and that whole stanza was my favorite because it was like very specific to like your family members, but also it's something that most people that have gone through loss can still like empathize with, and I thought that was great that it had generalizability but was also very specific.
I agree with what Avalon said. That those were also my favorite lines of the poem too. I really enjoyed it because like I feel like every stanza you describe another reason why she was an important character in your life, and what an important role she played in your family, as a lot of people's grandmothers do. And you just, the way how you describe her, she sounds like a really remarkable person, and I could kind of get this image of what she looked like this sweet little church lady who like always has cookies and candies in her purse and just like sweet as sugar, and is always like there to lift you up whenever you need it. I feel like I just got a very good sense of her personality from this piece. So I really enjoyed it.
I agree with what Lauren said earlier about the repetition of the line, I just have to get through. To me, I kind of read that as a mantra, your personal mantra almost. So I think that kind of gave us, as the readers, a more introspective look. And in addition to that whole introspection, I like the lines where you question, what do I do? And I wasn't ready to lose you. Because while I do think that this poem served as like an ode to your grandmother, I also feel like it's very much a personal piece in the sense that it's kind of going through your own personal grieving process and internal thoughts. And I thought that the repetition of the line, I just have to get through, and these kind of introspective thoughts really brought that point out and made it stronger.
I like repetitive. Go ahead. I'll mute.
I would agree with what Kate just said. Like that's kind of what I wrote in my letter, is that I think the repetition of the line really is powerful and shows kind of like the grieving process, if you want to call it that, like through the poem. But I also really enjoyed how your descriptions were very like visceral, and you connected these moments that you had with your grandma to also like how those impacted you, and how, so it's not just like all these events, but you're actually showing how much she impacted you in your whole life and how much that meant.
I'm attracted to the patterns, and the more I read it, the more I find patterns that I didn't notice the first time. If you look at every line that ends with "you" and just read those are kind of a structure in itself. Every day I miss you. So many things remind me of you. No one will ever replace you. and I wasn't ready to lose you. And the way those rhyme with the last line of every stanza really works. I also like some of your other rhyme choices, like your dad's safe ground and my best friend. So I like it when writers rhyme words that are kind of sound similar, but are not exact, not like perfect rhymes, like ground and friend, I think go well together. They also go well with the motif of I just have to get through.
One thing that I said I liked was how each stanza had kind of a different meaning behind it. Like one stanza was about like your grandpa's emotions, and then the next was like your lake house doesn't feel the same. So I liked how each stanza kind of shared a little bit behind like what was meaningful to your grandma and her impact on not only you but like the rest of your family. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I just thought this poem was like really relatable to anyone who's like lost someone close to them. Like it made me think of my grandpa passing away, and like I think it just did a good job like kind of explaining like how you have to like come to terms with it and like try and get through, like you said. So I don't know, I just really liked that aspect of it, that like I could relate it to myself even though it was like very much about your grandma.
I like the second sentence, how you led with a question. That's kind of hard to do in some instances, and I thought that it worked well for your poem.
Did we miss anybody? Yeah, I really like the rhythm of this, and I really like the repetition of the line, or a version of the line about getting through. And I actually like the way sometimes that line changed just a little bit. Like, but somehow I just have to get through. Or and then I really appreciated that in the last stanza we didn't have that line, and it was sort of looking forward, that the writer was thinking that there was some movement or optimism going forward. Yeah, and I agree. I thought it painted not only a great picture of your grandmother, but and her impact on you, but also her influence on other people, like your father, and what I really like that second stanza also. And I agree with Rose on the line breaks. Some of them are great. So, does anybody have any questions or critiques?
This is a small thing, but I noticed that every stanza, except the fifth and sixth stanzas, have 6 lines. The sixth stanza is just 1 line. That makes sense. But I don't understand why the fifth stanza only has 4 lines. I'm not sure if it's just not something you were paying attention to, or if it's an intentional thing I missed.
My only critique also comes from the 5th stanza. It might have just been how mine like formats on the page, but when I read it, the first line of the 5th stanza is on the first page and the rest was on the second. I'm just like saying, oh my god, sorry, my dog. Just like click enter and like make it all on one page just so there's not a weird line break. Sorry.
I'm going again with line breaks. I agree with that part because on mine, when I read it, it's like you have to jump a different page. And the only thing that like I think that it's consistent with lines and like the amount of stuff you have in a line, but the line "you were dad's safe ground and my best friend," I think it'd be easier if, because you have a small "you were papa's rock, his life and his muse," and then there's like that long line, if you just said "you were dad's safe ground, return, and my best friend." that's all I really could find.
Going off of that, I just said that for the most part, I feel like the lines are like the same, but there's a few like super short ones, there's a few like longer ones that do kind of disrupt the flow of the poem. So I feel like if you did try to make them all the same length, like maybe with Tyra's suggestion, then I think it would help it a lot.
Yeah, my only critique was kind of already mentioned by Rose. Like I just said, like the organization of the stanzas and the fact that the fifth one didn't have the same amount of lines as the others. Like I also don't know if that was like an intentional thing that you chose to do, but just like making sure that like the structure of the poem makes sense.
Something I noticed was I obviously really like the repetition of the but I just have to get through. But I noticed the second stanza has but somehow I just need to get through. And I thought that instead of having that in the second stanza, maybe if you put that at the end, it could be powerful just to show that like you've obviously tried, but like somehow you have to keep like going through and like healing from it.
I noticed something with flow as well. I thought in the second stanza, the line, "You were dad's safe ground and my best friend," for me personally, it threw the flow off a little bit. And I think that you'd be able to get away with that if instead of ending that sentence with a period, you move the period to the line following it. So the line, "So many things remind me of you." So I think that could potentially wrap up that thought with a neater transition.
One thing that I noticed was the line, "but I just have to get through" on the end of each stanza. Sometimes it's capitalized and sometimes it's not. So I don't know if you want to make that consistent throughout. But I also was kind of looking at it. I read it a few times, but I feel like if you were to move the fourth stanza up to right after the second, so the fourth stanza would become the second stanza, you kind of would have like, "You left us and he took you away," and then kind of going into your memories and a little bit of background behind her. And then when you say, "Your legacies and teaching will live forever," I don't know. For me, it kind of flows a little bit better, but that's something you could look at and see if that's something that you would want to do.
Okay, it seems like sometimes you have places where there are full sentences, but when they break up into lines, you capitalize the next line, and then sometimes you don't do that. So I don't know if there are specific rules for that, but an example is, "Every day I miss you, but I just have to get through," and "but" is capitalized. But in the previous line or previous sentence, "You didn't deserve this, now what do I do?" You don't capitalize now. Just maybe something to reconsider. Also, I'm torn between like, okay, when you first read it, it's really ambiguous the way it starts out. Not really sure what "rest easy" means. And then for the first stanza, you don't really tell who you're talking about. You don't really get to Nana until somewhere down the line. So I thought maybe if the title was "Rest Easy, Nana," or "Rest Easy" and then the first line, "Nana, you left us," or something, just to kind of set the tone, subject matter.
Just a couple of minor things, really, like a couple of people mentioned, just be mindful of capitalization and make sure that's consistent throughout the piece. I want to know a little bit about like what you and your grandma did together, like how much time you spent together and stuff like that. Because you said you were like she was your best friend, stuff like that. So like maybe it would be I think it would be cool to incorporate like things that you guys would do together. Like, did you go on walks? Did you talk about life? What did she teach you? And just like things like that. I thought it would be really enjoyable and it would make it more personable too.
Yeah, I also said what Tim said. My only critique was that I wanted to know more about what, because you mentioned like your grandma's teachings and that you obviously looked up to her and stuff a lot, and I just kind of wanted to know like more by what you meant by that and just adding more detail and like kind of like specifically what she did to teach, like that made you look up to her and what she taught you.
My critique has already been said as well. I just noticed the inconsistency of the capitalization of the buts and your ending sentences. Not a big deal, but that's just what I noticed.
Well, one of the things that I think Tim and Claire both mentioned was specificity, and I was really thinking about how you might think when she brought baked goods to the lake house, like did she have some special cookie or baked good that she brought? So specificity in that way. Also the teachings. When she had a kind demeanor, what did that mean? Was it the way she looked at you? And if so, like what color were her eyes? You know, those kinds of things that might make it even more evocative if they were more specific. So, does anybody else have anything? Megan, do you have any questions for us?
I don't have any questions. Thank you for all your comments. I don't think I've ever really written a poem before besides maybe elementary school, so it was definitely a challenge, but thank you.
Thank you. Now we will go to Rose. And let's see. Why don't you read from the beginning to pause?
Okay. The ocean froze over. My miracle was there. I finally had a chance, so I took it, and I ran. I ran far. I ran fast. I ran until it hurt. I stopped to catch my breath. Then the season changed. Ice turned to water. Nothing as far as the eye could see, except me, alone in the ocean. My skin freezing. My balance uneasy. My mind a wreck. My life on pause.
Thank you. So, who wants to start?
I can.
Start. Oh.
I keep doing that. You can go.
Awesome. So once like the obvious thing that jumped out at me was like the actual like visual of the poem itself, because it seems kind of like the audience reads along to like, I don't know how to explain it, but visually we are carried along in this journey that the narrator is going through, and I thought that was really cool. Like, as an experience in poetry that I've never really got to like experience, and it seemed very well like positioned and developed, and everything is in the right spot.
Yeah, going off of that, I think the first few lines, as well as like the whole shape of the poem, like really drew me in as a reader. Like, I wanted to keep going and like see where the poem was going. And I also like that when you like, or the person in the poem like starts to run, like the poem starts to move to the side too. Like, I thought that was really clever.
I liked like it was mentioned before, the formatting of the piece. I feel like this helps with the pacing of the poem, and I liked how it's uneven. It goes more towards the right side of the page, and it kind of gives me like an uneasy feeling, like, and I think that's what it's meant to do. It's supposed to make the reader feel uncomfortable a little bit, and I enjoyed it. So it was like enough discomfort that it's like, okay, I want to keep going, but not enough that it didn't deter me from reading the piece.
Yeah, I agree probably with everyone. I loved the format of this. I also said that the concept is really unique, like running onto the frozen water and all that. Like I loved that. Yeah, I just noticed in my letter I said, talking about like the format. For example, I said, at the current's mercy being pushed back, the line slowly started to fall back. I said towards the right side of the page, but I meant the left. And I can just like see that it was very obvious that you put a lot of thought into this poem, and I really respect that because mine also took a long time. So like, I just thought it was super unique, and I liked it. I also said I like the format shift of it. I said, although the poem didn't have a lot of rhymes to it, I think that it still had a good flow because there were multiple line breaks that could allow your reader to stop and kind of slow down and read the poem. And I thought it even made it stronger. So.
Yeah, along with everyone else, I really liked like how you formatted it on the page, but I'm gonna find something else to actually tell you. I really liked your word choice and how specific it was to everything happening like around the speaker, but it never really like gave context or like what or why they were doing it. You were just kind of like in the moment, and it was up to the reader to be able to like kind of make up a little story, if you will. And I really liked that. It kind of gave the reader some freedom, but also like it was so specific that clearly you put time and thought into it.
I think there's freedom, obviously when you're reading something, you have the freedom to read it at whatever pace you're reading. But this poem style, it seems to kind of take control more of like how fast you're going to read it. So when you have these short little lines, or in the second group of short lines where it's enjambment, and then there's all these adjectives mixed with the nouns. My skin freezing, my balance uneasy, my mind a wreck. Those are really quick little sound bites. They're really easy to digest. But then you kind of slow the reader down to read the parts that are long, longer lines, more of a paragraph. I think that's brilliant. I just like the way, I think anyone who reads this is kind of universally going to hear the tempo, and it seems like a lot of thought went into that.
My points have kind of already been said by other people, but I'll try to provide more specific examples. So I really liked, I think it was Lauren who mentioned this, the metaphor with the ice and the water. I wrote that I felt like stereotypically when there's ice in any kind of like piece of literature, it usually symbolizes some kind of like negative obstacle to overcome. But I like that you kind of did a spin on that, and when the ocean froze over, that was seen as a positive and it was your chance. So I thought that was a nice kind of break from the norm, and it encouraged me to go on and keep reading. I was interested. And then structurally, I also really like that some elements were super literal and they kind of fit in with the message or the image you're trying to make. Because I noted the line being pushed back was indented further to the left of the line above it, so you're literally like pushing the back. And even though that was super simple, it was super effective because again, it really just like gave a visual to the message you're trying to portray.
The only thing that I wrote that hasn't already been said is, I don't have it in front of me, but the second stanza, I thought it gave the reader great physical descriptions, which really strengthened the poem.
I said that I really loved how you organized it, and it was so visually appealing. I also think that there were a lot of lines in the poem, but like it was so easy to read that like that was like a job that you did.
Going off that, like the organization of it, I particularly enjoyed the lines that you chose to emphasize. I thought you did a good job, and like what points you decided to emphasize with your arrangement of your lines.
Is there anybody we haven't heard from?
Yeah. One thing that everyone's kind of said it already, but I don't have it in front of me, but when you were taking the chance to run off into the ice and you were staggering it across down the page, I felt like the poem kind of take control of me and like make me feel like I was like running off onto the ice. And then once you mentioned that you stopped, then you aligned all of the words, the lines in the stanza. So I really enjoyed that. I just felt like the poem took over like my mind, and I felt like I was being carried back and forth onto the ice with the character in your poem. So yeah.
Yeah, I really like the metaphor in the poem, or metaphors, and I agree that with Caitlin that that you do a great job of leading the reader where you want them to go, and because when you first look at it, it's like, oh wow, what, but when you're reading it, then everything sort of, you guide the reader, and it's really easy to go for your eye to go where you want the reader's eye to go. I think it's a poem that starts off very hopeful. I think Kate's right. Usually it's a kind of a cliche when you have although it's usually, it's a frozen ocean. You're expecting to fall through, but that's not what happens. And then, but then it melts. And then you're alone and you hit an obstacle, but then at the current's mercy is such a beautiful line too, I think. And then there's determination to overcome this obstacle. And I think it's really a powerful poem. So who has some thoughts about or questions, clarifications, suggestions for change?
Can I go first? Okay, with all the metaphors and actions in this imagery, in this this poem, I think it's fantastic. It begs to be read a second time. What I noticed is that the first about half of the poem is past tense, and then at some point right around the middle, I think, well, maybe 2/3 of the way through, you switch to present tense. And if you're going to go back and read it again, it kind of throws you off, because then you have to go back to something that was written in the past tense. So my only suggestion would be maybe add the words "I remember" at the very start. So I remember the ocean froze over. My miracle was there. So you're in one place on the timeline remembering what happened, and then you switch to the present tense. That'd be my suggestion.
I'm going to give you the most generic critique, and I'm very sorry for it. Think about adding punctuation throughout the piece. That's all I got. To try and, I don't know, maybe give it more of a storyline, but also it might kind of ruin like the flow you created, so I don't really know. But also I really like your background. That's all I got.
Yeah, going off of that, I really did not know what to critique about this. All I kind of like questioned or asked or whatever was why you ran out onto ice in the first place. It obviously could have been like a metaphor or something that I didn't get, but I'm just like why did you run out there in the first place? Maybe explain that or something. I don't know, but I love the rest of it.
I said the exact same thing. I said if there was like a little bit more description as to what this poem is about, I think it'll help the readers understand like why you ran out on ice. Maybe again, like Lauren said, it's a metaphor I missed, but I don't know.
In my opinion, I think that since you repeat certain words, I want to see you play on that more and maybe try and use some more like alliteration or repetition of consonants or vowel sounds, and I think that would help, and I think that would make it like sonically pleasing. Otherwise, I thought it was really good. I enjoyed it.
I also had a pretty hard time finding anything to critique, so I said basically the same thing as Avalon. And like I could tell that not using punctuation was like a choice that you made, but like I don't think I completely understood why. So maybe considering adding punctuation. I don't know.
I kind of
just
wrote the same thing
sorry,
as
go ahead.
Lauren. I understood. Oh, sorry.
No, you're good.
I understood the piece as like a journey, but I wanted to know what or like what occurs in your life that is like this kind of, or just I don't know, just more personal to you.
Yeah, that was actually kind of similar to what I was going to say. I kind of thought that some specificity might benefit the poem a little bit, but you also, I could tell you're going for that kind of more abstract idea, so that could have detracted from it as well.
My only thing that I had was that I just was a little confused at the end, kind of like what the purpose or goal of the poem, if it was supposed to turn more optimistic or kind of like remain with the same like vibe at the start. Just like maybe clarifying or adding a little more detail at the end would be helpful.
Yeah, the only area that I had confusion to was at the end, and mostly just between these two lines, because one line says ankles under the surface, and then another one says waiting on thin ice. So like in that position, I just wasn't sure like if our character was like if the ice had melted or if it was like thin and they were like falling through. So just kind of like some clarity maybe at the end could help wrap it up in like a very like concrete way.
One thing I said was I feel like the way that you structured the poem, you did it really well, but I don't think it really or personally, I don't really think it needs to have stanzas. I think that just creates a lot of like extra space. But maybe that's one thing that you could look at because, you know, stanzas do kind of portray like different movement or different sections throughout the poem, but I felt like if you didn't have those stanzas in there, the flow of the poem would be a little better, if that makes sense. But maybe that's just something to look at.
Yeah, I had one minor suggestion. I thought maybe if you wanted to add more detail, you could kind of add a description of the ice disappearing from beneath your feet when you finally fell into the melted ocean, but kind of me grasping at straws there.
Did we get everybody? Lily, did we get you?
Yeah, I said the thing about punctuation.
One, I would love to hear from Rose about why you chose this, the formation that you did. But one of my other questions was whether or not at the current's mercy, the 4 lines at the current's mercy was a separate stanza. or whether that was part of the last stanza, but that was, yeah, I would love to hear sort of an explanation of how the format was chosen.
Okay. Thank you all a lot. I did get a lot of good ideas from that. I already have like 3 lines that I'm going to change just based off this. Thank you all so much for all these good ideas. Sorry, what was it you wanted?
I'm curious as to what inspired you to come up with this format.
Honestly, the first idea was the idea with the 2 lines, I ran and being pushed back, was a poem where the poem's trying to get somewhere. It's trying to get to the other side of the page. And it's just, the struggle is getting to that other side of the page. And then I thought of floating in water, and that's how I ended up with that.
So I wonder if we should be at the other side of the page by the time the poem ends.
There is something, it's a very small detail. Oh, actually, I didn't do that right. My point was going to be that the last line is the farthest line. I didn't do that because of that one point reformatting. I forgot to indent it once more. But it wasn't quite going to reach the end, but it was going to be optimistic that it'll make it there someday.
Cool. And then the 4 lines at the current's mercy that start with at the current's mercy, that's a separate stanza, correct?
You see, that was originally formatted differently, and I just kind of didn't think about it. It works either way. That's just an issue with me forgetting to fix things after a reformat.
Cool. Do you have any other questions for us?
Nope, you all gave me a lot of great advice. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So does anybody have any general questions or comments about, we have one more class, we have one more piece to workshop, and that's Jessica's, which is posted on Icon. And then we'll just have a general chat, but and say goodbye next week. So does anybody have any, and then the writing reflection is due this Friday, and then the rest of the whole portfolio is due on the 8th. So that's a few days after our last class. So if you have any questions next week, as you complete those pieces, let me know, but also I'll be around on email. Anybody have any questions? Thanks for showing up once again.
Yeah, actually, I have a question.
Okay.
I know we kind of talked about it last week, the whole like grade thing with like the pass fail. So is the grade on Icon like right or whatever? Like, should we base our pass fail off of that? Because I think we have to choose in like a week or something.
Yeah, I think you have to choose by the 8th. Is that correct?
I think so.
Yeah. Well, your grade is probably higher than it is in Icon because not all of your pieces are graded.
Sure.
So.
Okay.
So, thank you, and I will see you next week. And let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.